Guys at home is a three-color deck. It's got Tarmogoyf, Nimble Mongoose, and Delver of Secrets as its creature base, and it just tries to get one of those creatures down and then take over the game with them. Uses Force of Wills, Dazes, and in this case, Dan is playing 4 copies of Stifle to disrupt their opponent, and we are off. Raymond Perez starts with a Polluted Delta on turn 1, and he does not crack it. Dan Jessup does immediately crack his Scalding Tarn, and Raymond responds. Are we going to see a Stifle here? It doesn't look like Raymond is running Stifle, but just responding to play around Dan's Stifle.
Yeah, one of the things that can happen with the Rug Delver deck. Now, Rug Delver, if you're an old school Legacy player, is basically the newfangled version of Canadian Threshold. There was a while back in the day where Wasteland and Stifle as a mana suppression element was a big part of how the deck was able to function. And it moved away from that, but then has come back for the last at least year or so, where most of the Rug Delver lists have been running both Stifle and Wasteland. So when Dan fetches right there, Raymond fetching in response is basically a part of this idea of, I don't want to have my fragile mana be hurt badly by you. So I'm going to sacrifice my land in response to guarantee that I get a land out.
And Dan Jessup fetched up a Volcanic Island, cast Ponder, looks at 3 cards, decides he doesn't want them, he's going to shuffle them away. So Dan, playing his game plan, he's building up his graveyard for that Nimble Mongoose to have Threshold, also getting some cards in there for Tarmogoyf. And now he will draw a random card with Ponder, and there's Stifle.
Okay. Raymond Perez can see a Bayou, a Force of Will, there is a Baleful Strix. This is an awesome card as well. Baleful Strix, you can see get dazed there by Dan Jessup, but Baleful Strix, flying Death Touch 1/1. When it comes into play, draw 1 card. It's a very good card.
Very innocuous card, and it might be surprising in a format like Legacy for that card to see play, and in this case get enough respect to be dazed. But it just, all of those abilities add up, and it can become a real problem. That Death Touch, will block a Tarmogoyf, trade with a Tarmogoyf, trades with Delver of Secrets, and it cantrips. So Dan Jessup using a card to trade for it now rather than having to trade a creature for it later and having to deal with the extra card that's drawn.
And Cosgrove_C on Twitter mentions, woohoo, go, at Ray Future Pro. That's Raymond Perez's Twitter handle. That's at Ray Future Pro. He's already got a little bit of a following for himself because of his excellent Pro Tour finish. You can see a third land here facing off against Dan Jessup's only a single solitary land.
Yeah, he set himself back with the Daze, returning the island to his hand. He pondered again. And now he's going to go for a Brainstorm. Brainstorm's here in the main phase with a Scalding Tarn available to sacrifice.
If you're just joining us, I'm Adrian Sullivan here with Ricky Hayashi, and this is the StarCityGames.com Open Series featuring the Invitational. We are in Indianapolis, Indiana. This is in the Indianapolis Convention Center. On the right, Raymond Perez, just off screen with Shardless Bug. On the left, pardon. On the right, Dan Jessup with Rug Delver. Both of these players are playing in round 1 of this event. There are several players who have buys at this event, and so that's something that you can earn with a sufficient number of StarCityGames.com Open Series finishes.
Indeed, up to 2 buys. In this case, they would be buys in the Legacy rounds, but to make up for that, the top 8 of this tournament, which is played on Sunday, is going to be Legacy. So you can't just punt the Legacy part if you want to win this. And here we go. Now Dan is fetching up his second land. So he brainstormed, didn't like what he saw, and actually he is fetching in response to Raymond fetching, and he's going to get some value out of that Stifle.
There it is.
So Raymond Perez denied a land drop, which in this case, getting to 3 lands, the namesake of the deck, Shardless Agent, does cost 3 mana. It's got a Misty Rainforest, but just goes for a Tarmogoyf, playing around Daze.
You can see there some blue spells in Dan Jessup's hand. One of them is a Force of Will. He allows the Tarmogoyf to resolve. There is a grindy element to this matchup, and tossing away 2 cards, the Force of Will itself and then another blue card, can often end up being really difficult because both players have access to Tarmogoyf. Both players have access to these single spell removal or answer cards, but Dan Jessup knows that Shardless Bug also has access to cards like Ancestral Vision. It's just a very, like, here we go. We see a Tarmogoyf. This is the Modern Masters Tarmogoyf on Dan Jessup's side.
Wow, so those Tarmogoyfs already 5/6s. Vastwood Gorgers dueling on the field here.
We see Raymond Perez try to Force of Will that Tarmogoyf, and Dan Jessup Force of Wills back so that he can have a Tarmogoyf.
And then he chooses to Wasteland the Underground Sea. Gonna try to cut Raymond off of his mana, keep him off of Shardless Agent and or multiple spells for the turn.
One of the things you sometimes see in these style of matchups is a card for a grind, like a Life from the Loam in the sideboard. Raymond does not have that card, but Dan Jessup does have 1 Life from the Loam in the sideboard, which I expect we'll see in games 2, and if we go to a game 3, we'll probably see it there as well. Dan Jessup, a Lightning Bolt in hand, considering cracking in with his Tarmogoyf, they would bounce off of each other, but if that were to be blocked, he could try to remove the other Tarmogoyf with a single Lightning Bolt. You see Raymond does do the block, damage happens, Lightning Bolt on the Tarmogoyf, and down goes Tarmogoyf. Now you do see that there's a Maelstrom Pulse, the only one in Raymond Perez's deck in his hand right now. So he does have an answer to his opponent's Tarmogoyf.
Obviously wouldn't want to do that on a board where he has his own Tarmogoyf, but now that his is gone, a consideration, but he has to be thinking about what counter spells to play around.
Yeah, speaking of which, Spell Pierce hanging out in Dan Jessup's hand.
All right, we'll see if Raymond is going to go for the Maelstrom Pulse this turn. If he has a land, he'll want to play that to play around Daze, but unable to play around that Spell Pierce that we know is lurking. And I just looked it up real quick. Raymond Perez did write about his Pro Tour experience. He finished in 11th place. You can go to brainstormbrewery.com and check out Raymond Perez's report.
Okay, we see in his hand, cast that Maelstrom Pulse we talked about earlier. Force of Will and Jace in hand. Is this worth his fight? This is a big toss here, tossing away that Jace if he were to do it. But his life total is going down quickly.
The Tarmogoyf is a 5/6. I think you have to fight over at this point.
And he says yes, he agrees. This leaves a Stifle and a Lightning Bolt in Dan Jessup's hand. And Tarmogoyf down, 4 mana to 3 mana, empty-handed Raymond Perez. And will there be another threat? Dan Jessup is considering casting for mana the Gitaxian Probe he has just drawn against the empty-handed Raymond Perez. And he does it. He's like, yep, here's my hand, got nothing.
Yeah, nothing in his deck costs 3.
And the reason Dan would want to do that is that he has 2 mana left, so that if he draws a card like Tarmogoyf, he can still cast it. He doesn't want to lose the life. You can see him thinking a little bit longer here for the second one.
At that point, I think I would have just paid the 2 life for that second Gitaxian Probe in case he does draw Tarmogoyf.
And you see him pass with the Misty Rainforest up. His hand is Lightning Bolt, Ponder, and Stifle. We see a Deathrite Shaman, a very good spell. And Dan does not cast anything there. Second Lightning Bolt.
So certainly just going to take out that Deathrite Shaman. He's going to Ponder first to see what his options are. That's always a good play.
We see a Daze.
Looks like 2 Dazes, and I think there was a green creature in the mix.
Bolt, Stifle his hand. Raymond Perez, empty-handed. Raymond Perez Jr., if you prefer.
Does Senior play Magic?
I have no idea.
Maybe we can find that out later.
And he keeps it. It is a Tarmogoyf. He shuffles away the Dazes that were on top, thanks to that Misty Rainforest. And as developed as this game is, even if Deathrite Shaman is able to get rid of some of the cards in the graveyard for a little bit, that Tarmogoyf is likely to be very big for a little while. So It takes a little bit more action on a Deathrite Shaman before you can shrink a Tarmogoyf. Maybe there's one Planeswalker perhaps in somebody's graveyard, but I don't think so. I think it's land, sorcery, creature, instant, artifact. Artifact being one of the Shardless agents. In with the unblockable Creeping Tar Pit and a land for Raymond Perez. Pass. Go.
Yeah, the only Planeswalker we've seen, Jace the Mind Sculptor, was exiled to a Force of Will. I believe the artifact we have is the Baleful Strix, and yeah, now Raymond's going to exile the Baleful Strix with the Deathrite Shaman to get rid of the artifact and try to shrink it down at least one level.
And what that will do is will actually gain him effectively the 2 life shore from the gaining life from that shaman, but with the Tarmogoyf being 1 smaller, and Raymond Perez's life about to go up to 13. Oh, look at that stifle. He's like, no, don't gain the life. The removal is so it's still in there. That was really nice. He stifles the effect so that card is still in there, and then he's like, no, now you die, Deathrite Shaman.
Right. It's a targeted effect. So if you counter the ability, you don't exile the targeted card. And I'm wondering, yeah, it looks like Raven blocked the Tarmogoyf before activating the ability.
And Ray just trying, I think, to keep his life total large enough so that he can get to his powerful plays, like, for example, Shardless Agent into something impressive.
Well, this board's a problem for him because he only has the 1 Maelstrom Pulse. He doesn't have any 1-for-1. Oh, there you go. Abrupt Decay off the top.
So we see a activation of his Creeping Tar Pit number 2, the second one in his deck, to block, and then a then a Abrupt Decay after it's bolted to kill the Tarmogoyf. But Dan, unfortunately for Ray, has another Tarmogoyf. Ray also has another Tarmogoyf. But now Delver is going to go to the air. It knows the secret, and the secret is Brainstorm.
That is a good secret to know because it's going to reveal some other secrets here. It's a map that leads to another map, and then maybe eventually you'll find the treasure.
Dan Jessup very close to killing Raymond Perez here. He has only a single Brainstorm in hand. Brainstorm, a great card, but if he casts it right now, he's basically hoping to just draw one of the bolts. He's already cast several bolts this game.
Yeah, they call that Brainstorm locking yourself when you have no way to reshuffle your library after it, but with your opponent at 4 life and now going to 1, might as well, right?
I like holding off. Honestly, I really like holding off here. And Ray draws a card. Packs it up, packs it in.
Has no answer to the Insectile Aberration, that 3/2 flyer. Gonna finish it off.
Players, we are joined this weekend by Magic artist Jeff.
So, we've been talking about how big we expect the tournaments to be this weekend, the Standard and the Legacy Opens. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are coming to Indianapolis for one of those tournaments, we have the Standard Open on Saturday, the Legacy Open on Sunday. There's also a Sealed Classic on Sunday if you prefer to play Sealed instead of Legacy. There is pre-registration available for those tournaments. It is going to be open until midnight, I believe, Eastern Time tonight, Friday, October 25th. So make sure to pre-register for those tournaments because there are going to be lines out the door. Go to StarCityGames.com and go to the event information page. There will be links to the pre-registration site.
If you're just joining us, I'm Adrian Sullivan here in the booth with Ricky Hayashi. Sitting off to the side is Joey Pasco, amongst others. Glenn Jones talking to Shaheen Surani right now for a feature that we'll be sure to show a little bit later today.
Shaheen Surani been championing the blue-white-red control deck, says it's better than Esper in the metagame right now for Standard.
Yeah.
And for Legacy, we have to believe that he's still on Esper Stoneblade. That's been his standby. Shaheen is a multi-time invitational top 8er. I believe it was 4 in a row at one point before he failed to top 8-1.
Oh, I wouldn't say, I don't know if I want to call it failure with that many successes.
A miss?
There we go. That sounds nicer. Raymond Perez's sideboard. 2 Force of Will, 2 Thoughtseize, 3 Whip Flare, 1 Notion Thief, 2 Flusterstorm, 3 Nile Spellbomb, 1 Arcane Lab, and 1 Dismember. Of these cards, there's only one card that I definitely want to see come in. That's the 1 Dismember, which can kill anything in, usually it can kill anything in Dan Jessup's deck that's not named Nimble Mongoose. Now, Force of Will is going to be sideboarded out in this matchup most likely. Some people like to keep in 1 or 2 in this kind of matchup because you sometimes do want to fight over things, but the drain of a Force of Will is actually a really, really big deal. I wouldn't be too surprised by Nile Spellbomb coming in against a deck that has so many things to deal with the grave. We've got the Tarmogoyf and Nimble Mongoose being cards that it can affect. Now, it's not great. It's not the equivalent of being able to go Relic against them, because Relic of Progenitus can do a lot of work, but the Nile Spellbomb is a possibility, but it's a pretty minor possibility, honestly. Thoughtseize, fairly solid, but again, the Rug Delver deck is so aggressive, you might not want to go that direction. What kind of sideboard cards do we see from Dan Jessup?
Well, Dan's certainly going to be bringing in some Submerges. He's got 3 of those, 2 Pyroblasts. He's got 2 young Pyromancers. That's a very interesting card. For a while in Legacy, we saw people trying the young Pyromancer main deck, mostly in Grixis Delver decks.
Yeah.
And it didn't really catch on, but Dan's got 2 of them in the sideboard. You mentioned the Life from the Loam earlier.
Yeah.
That is a fantastic card to bring into this matchup. Shardless Bug has no basic lands in his deck, so Life from the Loam with Wasteland Recursion, you could really lock your opponent out. And he's got 1 copy of Ancient Grudge, which I was gonna mention the Whip Flares in Raymond's sideboard. Those are because he's got Shardless Agent and Baleful Strix are both artifact creatures.
Yeah.
So maybe you just bring in 1 Ancient Grudge for a little extra value, 2 removal spells for opposing creatures.
I mean, there's certainly a lot of options for Dan Jessup. I mean, I can see arguments for, I can see arguments for about 8 or 10 cards that you could see in the sideboard from Dan Jessup coming in, but you don't necessarily want to bring in all of that many cards, even though they're possible, because you want to make sure that you don't cease to be the deck that you want to be. This is a lesson that I think a lot of people first learned at, I want to say, Pro Tour Tokyo in around maybe 2002 or 3, the Affinity Pro Tour, where a lot of players, including very big name players like, say, Zvi Mauschwitz, ended up playing too many sideboard cards and learning that the hard sideboarding of extra cards that you don't need, it gave you a lot of weapons, but you ceased to be the deck that you were. So even though there are, maybe 7 or 8 or even 9 cards in Dan Jessup's sideboard, he's got to be careful about not bringing too many of them in. He wants to be the deck that can absolutely, put down a clock and back it up. So it's very possible he might just bring in 5 or 6 cards, even though other cards might have a use, just keeping it simple.
Keep it simple, says Adrian Sullivan. Yeah, of course I believe in keeping it simple. Too many decision trees and Legacy for me. And this matchup, really, it's hard to say who's really favored because it seems so grindy that often it's really the play that determines who's going to win rather than the decks itself. That game we did not see the Shardless Bug deck fire off any Ancestral Visions. That's a card that can put it over the top. Jace the Mind Sculptor never hit the battlefield. It was pitched for Force of Will. I feel like those are the cards that it really needs to take over the long game.
We see the opening play of the game here. Raymond Perez dropping a Deathrite Shaman. On turn 1, a Deathrite Shaman is really good. We see a Delver of Secrets from the Dan Jessup on the opponent's side. But this card is a card that can accelerate you. There's a Baleful Strix. Am I going to draw a card? And it works. Draw a card. I remember Baleful Strix, the coolest owl in Magic, perhaps. Right there, you can see it on the left. Flying, Death Touch, enters the battlefield, draw a card. That means that even though this guy's flipping right here, the Lightning Bolt on top of Dan Jessup's deck is going to need to be used to clear the way if he wants to be able to get over there. The Baleful Strix, it will kill whatever it blocks.
Yeah, very subtle card advantage here, making Dan use a Lightning Bolt to get rid of the Baleful Strix, but it is already cantripped, so Raymond Perez is going to be up a card on that exchange, and you really need those kinds of interactions to add up to win this matchup. That's why you were saying Force of Will comes out, because you don't want a 2-for-1 to counter something.
Now, like I said, there are many players who advocate leaving in some small number of Force of Wills, like 1 or 2, just so you can have it in the mix with brainstorms and ponders, so you can say, aha, that one I will definitely counter. But you don't want to go too far that way. We see the bolt we talked about earlier.
Yeah, there you go. Insectile Aberration cracks in for 3. I don't know if crack in is the correct term for an insect. Buzzes in.
The Nimble Mongoose comes down. It's a 1-1 currently. With Threshold, though, the Nimble Mongoose can become a 3-3. You can't target that guy.
No, but Deathrite Shaman can block it and control the graveyard. So currently being blanked. And there's another Baleful Strix.
We see that Submerge you talked about earlier. Submerge, an incredibly good card from Mask's block. Blue 4, instant, put target creature on top of its its owner's library. Now that sounds pretty expensive, doesn't it? 5 mana to put a creature on top?
Yeah, I wouldn't cast that in limited.
Right, so why are people playing it?
Because it's got an alternate cost. There you go, you see it right there in response to the fetch land. This is a classic legacy play. If you control an island and your opponent controls a forest, which currently is the case, you can cast it without paying the mana cost, and doing it in response to the fetch forces the Baleful Strix to get shuffled away right here.
Yeah, this is one of the key cards. Submerge, one of the key plays in Legacy in these blue-green style matchups. Submerge is a card that is just very powerful. The free ability there, as you can see, the island forest trigger. You control an island, they control a forest. Anytime that you are getting a powerful effect for no mana, sign me up. I mean, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's when cards tend to get banned. It's when they get too powerful for no cost.
Yeah.
This one, not too powerful. It's a very, very good sideboard card.
Another Strix. Strix number 3.
Sure.
You can see the dead Strix. Remember, there's a Strix somewhere in Raymond's deck that got pushed back in there and shuffled away. Here's a third one. This is a very powerful card in the matchup. We see another Submerge in Dan Jessup's hand. And a young Pyromancer. Pyromancer, a really, really good card in Tarmogoyf Mirrors. Young Pyromancer, one of the newest cards in Legacy to make any kind of impact. Young Pyromancer is red 1 for a 2/1 human wizard. There you're going to see it. And one of the things that this card is really good at, it creates a 1/1 elemental every time that you cast a instant or a sorcery. So in a matchup where things like Tarmogoyf or things like, various little creatures on the board are going to be a part of the game, the ability to create all of these random little creatures matters. 2 mana, Whip Flare.
Oh.
Ouch. You can see that Deathrite Shaman tapped to remove a Misty Rainforest to make the other mana. If this spell resolves, Deathrite Shaman will die.
But so
will everybody but the Baleful Strix.
Yeah, that non-artifact creature. As I was saying earlier, Baleful Strix and Shardless Agent, 2 of the key cards in this Shardless bug deck, are artifacts. And he manages to take out that Nimble Mongoose before it's a 3/3, so clears the board and now loads up with a Tarmogoyf.
In for 1, a big 1 damage.
Don't see that too often, Baleful Strix attacking for 1, but it's got a power. Get every damage in you can. That's going to matter.
5/6 Tarmogoyf. He's no slouch. We see another fetch land from Dan Jessup. Nimble Mongoose looks like it's going to be dropped down into play. We see Stifle and Submerge in hand. Dan Jessup is just hoping that Raymond Perez lays a fetch line and cracks it so we can get rid of that Tarmogoyf for good.
And the Nimble Mongoose, surprisingly, is relatively close to becoming a 3/3 here. With the Deathrite Shaman off the board now, there is that possibility.
Another Tarmogoyf. Ouch. You see Dan Jessup give it a thumbs up, but he can't be happy about it. And Ray Perez circles the card around a little bit. Also, I'm putting a Deathrite Shaman into play. Dan is in trouble here. Are there any cards that can save him? I mean, I think the only thing he can do is drop a young Pyromancer and then just start casting a ton of spells.
Yeah, and needs at least a Tarmogoyf to block one of them. But he doesn't find one, so this turn probably going to have to block with a Nimble Mongoose here.
You can see that Submerged put to the front of his hand. He might be having to throw off a Desperation Submerge. That's not exciting.
No. No, you really want to use it in response to some kind of fetch effect so that you can get rid of the creature permanently. In this case, he's just going to put it back on top and delaying the inevitable. So he can afford to take the damage from the rest of the creatures, but he's still facing down a Tarmogoyf and a Baleful Strix and another Tarmogoyf on top of the library. 2 Nimble Mongooses. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I mean, he's very close to being able to make it there, but look at that.
Yep.
Deathrite Shaman starting to do some work, and that knocks one further card deeper in so that he is not at that threshold level.
Yeah, and he's got 2 reactive spells in his hand, Stifle and Spell Pierce.
And he's like, you know what, this game's all done. Because the thing about that turn where he was at, there was the Tarmogoyf in play that he'd have to double block in order to be able to
try to kill.
But I couldn't count whether he had 5 cards in his graveyard.
I believe he had 6, then 5 after the Deathrite activation.
He has to actually, if he fetches with his land, he only has 6, so he doesn't have threshold, and then 2 reactive cards. His opponent has to actually do something for him to be able to have the number of cards necessary to kill the Tarmogoyf. But let's pretend all of that happens, just for the sake of argument. Well, then there's still a Deathrite Shaman in play, and he's at 4 life, and he's almost dead just to that. He realizes he can't do it. He can't actually survive all of the angles, so he scoops it up, and we go to game 3.
Yeah, and there was the second Tarmogoyf that was going to get recast that turn. So I believe he could have cracked his own fetch land, then stifled it to get to threshold, but even then he's trading a Nimble Mongoose for a Tarmogoyf. Can't deal with the rest of the crew. Just really had no hope in that last turn, one way or the other.
And if you're just joining us, I'm Adrian Sullivan here with Ricky Hayashi. And make sure that you're joining us on Twitter at SCG Live and join the conversation at hashtag SCGINVI. And interestingly, right now the people that have talked about the SCGINVI tag are all people that have gotten beginning the tournament losses. And so condolences to the 4 of you who have talked about your round 1 losses. Hopefully you'll turn that around.
And one of those losses, Chris Marshall at Topher Marsh, saying he lost versus Meat Hooks, the sliver deck that I mentioned. So there is a sliver deck out there. Let us know on Twitter if you want to see the sliver deck later on. If it keeps on winning, maybe we'll put it on camera. Everyone loves slivers. All right, so shuffling up for game number 3. This is round 1 of the Invitational here in Indianapolis, Indiana.
If you're looking at there on the left, we've got Raymond Perez with Shardless Bug. And on the right, Dan Jessup with Rug Delver. Now, this matchup in some ways represents kind of 2 extremes of the Tarmogoyf-style deck lists. The Shardless Bug deck runs 4 Tarmogoyf. The Rug Delver runs 4 Tarmogoyf. But the Shardless Bug is very much more of a controlling deck, and the Rug Delver is very much kind of the quintessential aggro control deck, which is to say it puts down a quick clock and then disrupts you with cards that waste your time afterwards. And when I say cards that waste your time, there's a radical difference between countering a spell and thought seizing the spell. If I thought seize one of your cards, you can do something else on your turn.
Yeah.
If I counterspell your card,
You're eating the turn.
You did it, and so it's the turn is eaten up.
Tarmogoyf style from Adrian Sullivan. Now I'm just imagining like, Tarmo style.
Oh God.
I'm so 6 months ago, I know.
Yeah.
The new thing is the fox, right? I've watched it once, but I don't recall ding-a-ling-a-ling. It goes the fox, was that it?
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't make it through the video.
Gotta keep up with the kids,
Oh,
Adrian.
No, I watched it and I just couldn't finish it.
Okay, well, we're gonna finish this match momentarily. We're heading into game number 3, the decider here in round 1 of the Invitational. 4 rounds of Legacy, 4 rounds of Standard today. And Dan Jessup opens with Delver of Secrets. And Raymond Perez, Deathrite Shaman. So this is... Oh, there's a Daze on the Deathrite Shaman. And little Delver gets in for 1.
Now, the Delver does not yet know the secret. There's a perfectly good example there. We saw Ray's turn basically used up with that Daze.
But it kind of used up Dan's next turn.
They used up a little bit of it. One of the things that Rug Delver has done is it works very effectively on 1 or even 2 mana.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should say 2 or even 1 mana would be a better way to put that.
And Delver of Secrets continues to not transform. So Jeff Goldblum attacks for 1.
I think it's Vincent Price.
Now, yeah, I made that reference a couple of weeks ago with Shaheen, and he had he actually had not seen either version of the fly.
We see a second Deathrite Shaman. I was actually going to make that reference myself, but I wasn't sure if you'd get it.
Oh, of course I get it.
Deathrite Shaman number 2 comes down, but it is bolted. And Dan Jessup, does he know the secret? He does not know the secret. There's another Delver. That was a pretty quick draw there. Second Delver. Raymond Perez, remember, really tore up the board earlier with a Whip Flare. And
Yeah.
Dan Jessup is in a position where a Whip Flare could get him. There are no red spells in Raymond's hand right now, though.
Whip Flare, Maelstrom Pulse might also do it here.
We see a third land, and the Baleful Strix, there it comes down. We've seen it a few times, the best owl in Magic. Some people might claim other owls are better, but I think that's the best owl.
Now, do you mean the best card, like Magic card owl? Or do you mean the best art? I mean, it's pretty fantastic art by Nils Hamm.
I think it is really, really great art. And, you know, it might not actually be an owl, but it looks pretty owly to me.
It's a bird, and it looks like an owl.
Well,
so
birds are owls.
Yeah, we'll go with that. And the owl trades for one of the Delvers there. And Raymond Perez brainstorms. We'll see if he is going to brainstorm lock himself. No, he has found at least a Verdant Catacombs, so he can get rid of 2 cards. And now, really, Dan has been stuck on the one land, the Volcanic Island, this whole game. Finally flips a Delver of Secrets, Adrian, off of a Ponder. And he's going to need to use that Ponder to find another land and really get going here.
Four land versus a solitary volcanic. It's got to be a little painful. Ponder maybe will help him find some, but wait, Raymond says fetch. Will Raymond just counter this Ponder? Or maybe he's using this as an opportunity to fetch so that he can't be stifled.
Yeah, that's always a consideration. I don't think he has the ability to cast a Spell Pierce. Yeah, I don't see any Spell Pierces on his list, so it looks like he's just playing around the Stifle. Dan ponders. He finds some lands, so he will now be able to start playing some lands. Unfortunately for him, all this time he's only gotten Raymond to 16 life because those Delvers did not flip until this very most recent turn, and it was immediately Abrupticade, so has not been able to do much damage. Behind on the board, Dan's in a tough spot here. He's thinking, he's pondering, literally and figuratively, and now draws his cards, the Scalding Tarn, passes the turn.
Untapping here with 4 land.
Now Andrew Hayes is going to counter your assertion on Twitter at ACHayes3192, says, better than Ebony Owl Netsuke. Do you remember this card, Adrian?
I do remember Ebony Owl Natsuke, but definitely better than Ebony Owl.
That was
the Owling Mine deck
yeah,
that the Ruel brothers put on the map maybe at around 2008.
Pro Tour Honolulu, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
And we see our first appearance of a Shardless Agent, I believe. In this entire match, this deck is called Shardless Bug, but we have not seen a Shardless Agent until this moment.
Robot James Bond. But Dan is going to stifle the Cascade effect, so Charlotte's Agent is a 3-mana 2/2 artifact creature, but it cascades, so you can cast something for free off the top of your library. Dan doesn't want to see that. He definitely doesn't want to see something like Ancestral Vision off that cascade.
And you know, if you think about what that means, that Dan threw away a card, and there's still a Shardless Agent in play. So I mean, he got an effect by using his Stifle there. He got value out of it.
Yeah.
But it's not like the Shardless Agent did not do what it wanted to do. It got Raymond up yet another card.
It's one of the better things to stifle, though, because it does represent a full spell.
Oh, absolutely.
There would be some blanks that Raymond could flip, like Abrupt Decay on this board or some other removal spell, but really, you do. That was a pretty good stifle there.
Oh, yeah. I'm just saying that the Shardless Agent still got value, even though it did not actually do its effect, because Dan lost a card.
Leaving behind a Grey Ogre, but quickly outclassed by Dan's Tarmogoyf.
And news from the floor, if you're following hashtag SCGINVI, Cedric Phillips has won his first round. So if you're a Cedric Phillips fan, you can give a brief cheer for Goblins from Cedric defeating Merfolk. On screen, though, you can see a Tarmogoyf from Dan Jessup facing against a Shardless Agent from Raymond Perez. These two players trying to win their first round.
Tarmogoyf a 5/6. Vastwood Gorger on the field, and now it gets Abrupt Decayed. You cannot Abrupt Decay a Vastwood Gorger, but you can certainly do so to a 5/6 Tarmogoyf.
If I saw a Vastwood Gorger in play in Legacy, I would be cheering.
Me too.
Well, I mean, if I was playing against it anyway. Another Tarmogoyf. You killed the first one, I've got another one.
Some hand gestures going on here. I wonder what they're trying to figure out. Just going to pass the turn. And now that Whip Flare, not quite so good in this situation. We saw in game number 2, Raymond cast it and ate 3 creatures.
You can see Raymond trying to contemplate what his options are for this turn. His hand, I think, is a Brainstorm and a Whip Flare. Yeah, Brainstorm and a Whip Flare. He's going to do the main phase Brainstorm, which is the best kind of Brainstorm, as all Brainstorm aficionados know.
Well, this is a tough spot because he's only got a 2/2. He's got a Creeping Tar Pit, but that's only a 3/2. So he cannot even double block and trade with the Tarmogoyf.
Puts a Whip Flare back, and another card I couldn't see. We see a Wasteland and a Ancestral Visions.
And this is going to be tough. So now he attacks with his Creeping Tar Pit for 3. He's going to suspend the Ancestral Vision, but is Brainstorm locked for the next 2 turns. Cannot escape his next 2 draw steps, which are blanks for this Tarmogoyf.
And Wasteland on the red source. If you don't know Ancestral Vision, awesome card, suspends for a blue, has no casting cost, and it has suspend 4. Once the suspend is done, then you get an Ancestral Recall.
Ooh.
Target player draws 3 cards. Now there's no casting cost up there. That's not a 0. But if you use a Cascade card like Bloodbraid Elf or Shardless Agent and you hit this, that's part of the combo of this deck to be able to get free draw 3 cards off of your Shardless Agent.
Using Brainstorm to set up that interaction most of the time. Dan casts a Brainstorm of his own. And we'll see if he's able to shuffle. Yes, he's got a Scalding Tarn. So Dan's gotten maximum effect out of his Brainstorm. Raymond Perez is Brainstorm locked for his next 2 draw steps. Whip Flare plus unknown card, but not a card that can shuffle his library.
Now, if you don't know what Brainstorm Locked means, with Brainstorm you draw 3 cards and then put 2 cards back. Brainstorm Locked is when you put 2 cards back with no way to shuffle them or get rid of them, so the next 2 cards are the 2 cards you didn't want anyway.
Didn't want them, but they're going to come back to haunt you next turn and the turn after that.
Ooh, that was pretty gross, actually. We see Submerge, Young Pyromancer. That's pretty awesome.
Those cards, yeah, that's a good combo there because you can cast your Young Pyromancer and then the Submerges are free. Really feeding off of the free effects. Jataxian Probe's another one. You can pay 2 life instead of paying blue. Here we go, Tarmogoyf. Now Tarmogoyf cracks, right?
Sure.
It crackles almost. Crackling for 5.
You
Takes
can-
a third of Ray's life.
You can see the Stifle in Dan Jessup's hand. One of the things that's
Oof.
really amazing about Stifle is that once the Ancestral Vision actually gets down to the point where the last suspend counter is off of it, and then you have a triggered moment. That triggered moment where the Stifle can actually stop the card from being cast off of the suspend, and it's just gone for good.
It looks like Raymond actually missed his first trigger there for Ancestral Vision.
I don't know that it's going to matter, but
Yeah.
that's a mistake.
He drew his card, then he fiddled with the die, and there was some discussion, and the die stayed at 4.
At the end of the turn, we see a Submerge. That's a very huge play right now. In comes the Tarmogoyf. Down to 5. I think Ray is basically without any options here at this point. Down to 3. Shardless Agent hanging out. Remember, there's a Submerge in the mix here for Dan Jessup. Ray has already seen these cards. We're going to have to see a Whip Flare here, I think, just to get rid of that young Pyromancer straight up, and I think he's still dead.
Oh.
The Submerge is right there. Boom, Submerge.
Did not go for the Whip Flare play. That was one of the 2 cards he put back with Brainstorm, so now he's drawn them both back.
So now Dan Jessup is just thinking this. Option A, just attack with the Tarmogoyf and eat the Shardless Agent, and then just be able to kill him next turn and save the Submerge for a rainy day. Or option B, use it now and go for the kill. And there's actually reasonable reasons to do either one of those plays.
Yeah, right now, what he really doesn't want is for Ray to draw something like an Abrupt Decay, but putting the Shardless Agent back on top, when it gets recast, you could cascade into Abrupt Decay, so that's probably actually worse.
It's dangerous. It's
depending
very
on
dangerous.
how deep the card is down the library.
And he goes for the block. Exactly, because let's pretend something goes wrong with the other play. That Shardless Agent being able to rebuy a new card is a huge deal. We see an Ancestral Vision drawn here by Raymond Perez. That's just going to lock up the fact that he's dead.
And he has to pass, and going to go for a chump block with his Creeping Tar Pit now. And actually, that missed trigger adding up, because if he had not missed the trigger, Ancestral Vision would have gone off next turn. And he, right now, potentially can survive. We do know about the Submerge, which is probably going to get cast here in response, or after the Creeping Tar Pit becomes a creature.
Yeah. The Whip Flare in his hand is actually completely dead without a red source available, and Raymond looking also dead himself here, because Dan Jessup submerges away the one blocker.
There it is.
Yep, Raymond Perez Jr. defeated 2-1 by Dan Jessup for our first match of the day. Rug Delver